هيا على الفلاح هيا على الفلاح هيا على خير العمل هيا على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد يا ولي العافية نسألك العافية عافية
محمد وآل محمد صلوات. اللهم صل أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا، من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد انتجبه لولايته واختصه بالرسالة وأكرمه بالنبوة، وأشهد أن عليا ولي الله وأمينه في أرضه وحجته على عباده. اللهم صل على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين. أوصيكم عباد الله وإياي بتقوى الله. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I take the opportunity to remind myself, and in the process to remind you, the principles of taqwa and the importance of adhering to such disciplines, a discipline that has been mentioned throughout the Holy Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demands that when iman has now permeated the heart, a person should struggle spiritually to seek his proximity, should develop taqwa within the heart, should be identified as a muttaqi. Now when the question is raised, how do we identify ourselves as amongst the muttaqin? Well, one of the greatest manifestations of doing so is referring to the khutbah of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam al-Muttaqin, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh. The statement that we've reached in that particular khutbah is when the Imam alayhi salam begins to explain. He says, لا يرضون من أعمالهم القليل. He says one of the characteristics of the muttaqin is that the little that they do, they are not satisfied with it. ولا يستكثرون الكثير. And the plenty that they do not consider it to be plenty. They consider it to be less or little. This is a very beautiful principle that the Imam alayhi salam is now demonstrating or presenting for us. You know, naturally as human beings, we tend to operate between two extremes. And this happens in different variations or different dimensions of our lives. We don't realize it, but we tend to behave in terms of extremes or in extreme cases. And that's often how we tend to lead our lives. We tend to forget and we tend to become oblivious that there is always a middle position. A middle position which is, of course, the best of all the different positions that we are presented with. In our social gatherings, for example, we have certain friends. And if someone does something that affects us, maybe they said something about us, maybe we lost their trust, whatever it may be, the natural response that we have is that we ghost them or we detach ourselves from them. We stop communication with them. And this happens very much, and it's very much prevalent within immediate families, within nuclear families as well. At one point in time, we get along very well, and the next we break off all communications with them. This is how we operate between extremes. There is always a middle ground, and that middle ground dictates that no, in certain relationships, a person should create boundaries. Maybe you should minimize the level of communication and interaction that you have with that said person. What happens in the case of a person continuously violates your trust? You give them chances over and over again. Perhaps you can make the argument and say, well, enough is enough. Now from this point onwards, I don't want any relationship with that said person. Well, Islam dictates that when you meet such a person, the least you could do is say salam. the least you could do is have a very minimum conversation with them. What that minimum conversation is and what that level is, you dictate for yourself. When it comes to our diets, for example, we see in the news, or there are different headlines projected towards us of how eating and consuming meat is harmful for ourselves and harmful for the environment. Next thing you know, there are large numbers of people who have now converted and become vegans. Again, we operate in extreme positions. When one is proposed with a problem, the natural solution is the opposite extreme. But once, when we come back to the words of the A'immat al-Athhar, you realize that there is always a middle path, and a middle path should always be taken. Here the Imam alayhi salam presents a principle of how a person can develop a middle position, specifically in developing a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, do not think that the little that you have done is a lot. Do not be satisfied with the little that you have done. With regards to the plenty that you've done, do not consider it to be plenty. Consider it to be little. A principle so powerful, it allows us to monitor ourselves so that we're continuously struggling and perfecting ourselves spiritually. Amir al-Mu'mineen in Khutba number 52, very interestingly, he mentions these statements. He says, by Allah, wallah, if you cry and you wail like the she-camel that has lost its young one, and you call out like the cooing of the pigeons, and you make noise the way the devoted monks make noise when they engage in worship, and you were to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you leave behind your wealth and your children, the world that you're a part of, with the intention of securing His proximity and developing a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, the Imam is saying, whatever you do, when you exhaust all of your efforts in His worship and in His obedience to seek His forgiveness from the sins that we have committed, He says, this is very little. It's very little in comparison to the reward that I hope for you, in comparison to the punishment that I fear from you. The Imam is not presenting a very extreme example, that if you were to exhaust all of your efforts in His worship, he says, in the end, this is very little in comparison to what is to come in the hereafter. Never be satisfied with the plenty that we have done in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, he says, ثَلَاثٌ قَاسِمَاتُ الظَّهْرِ. There are three attributes or three qualities or characteristics which breaks a person's back. He says, رَجُلٌ إِسْتَكْثَرَ أَمَلَهُ. When a person believes that he has done a lot in terms of obedience and ibadah, وَنَسِيَ الذُّنُوبَ. And he has forgotten his sins. وَأُعْجِبَ بِرَأْيِهِ. And he considers himself proud with the opinions that he has. Very, very interesting words. Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam likewise, when speaking about Iblis, he says, Iblis said that if I dominate the son of Adam in 3 cases, I will have no regrets about his actions, because I know that deep down his actions are absolutely rejected. When he counts his deeds as many, so he believes that he's done a lot in his life. Number 2, when he forgets his sins. And number 3, when pride and arrogance has overpowered him. When we speak about Nabi Musa alayhi salatu wassalam, very interestingly, now these are the days which are very strongly attributed to Nabi Musa alayhi salam. We're gradually entering the days of the Hajj. They say in the beginning of Dhul Qa'dah, Nabi Musa was now commanded by Allah to go towards the mountain, to spend 30 days and 30 nights within the mountain, which were then 10 days were added to the 30 days, altogether being 40 days. But it began from the time of Dhul Qa'dah all the way to the 10 days of Dhul Hajj. Now we're entering these 10 days of Dhul Hajj, which are considered to be very, very special according to our traditions. Now this was the time when the Torah was now being revealed to Nabi Musa alayhi salam. The narrations mention, as well as the ayah of the Holy Quran, that 70 elite scholars from the Bani Israel joined Nabi Musa alayhi salam. So as they were climbing the mountain, during the end of the 10 days, Nabi Musa was now commanded by Allah to reach a particular station within the mountain, a particular place. So he told his companions, the 70 that were there with him, that we have to reach this particular place of the mountain. So as he ascends very, very quickly. Whilst the rest of his companions are taking their time, they're going slowly, some of them are tired, some of them are struggling. Despite the fact Nabi Musa is hastening towards this particular place. When he reaches it, Allah then speaks to him. He says, وَمَا أَعْجَلَكَ أَنْ قَوْمِكَ يَا Musa. Why is it that you've hastened towards me in such a way that you've left behind your companions? Nabi Musa replies, he says, وَعَجِلْتُ إِلَيْكَ رَبِّي لِتَرْضَى. I have hastened towards you so that you may be pleased with me. Rasulullah, when he describes the emotional condition of Musa alayhi salam at this particular moment in time, he says that Musa did not eat as much, he did not sleep as much. The only thing that he craved for and he desired for was meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Tafsir al-Safi, there's a narration attributed to Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Where the Imam says that the one who loves, when there is love within one's heart, there is no desire for food, there is no desire for drink, there is no desire for all of the material things that we're surrounded by, the homes or for example the clothes and so on and so forth, until the person reaches his beloved. This was the state of Nabi Musa alayhi salam. Now, Nabi Musa alayhi salam, we have to realize this is one of the Ulul Azm, one of the greatest prophets of Allah. From the moment he enters this world, he has never disobeyed or never acted in violation to Allah's command. This is Nabi Musa who has always spent his time in ibadah, in obedience towards Allah. We could wholeheartedly say that Nabi Musa did a lot in his life in terms of ibadah, in terms of worship and turning to Allah in obedience. Yet, given the opportunity, he would always hasten. Why does he hasten in this particular circumstance? Because there was this desire to converse with Allah, number one. Number two, there was this eagerness to hear the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number three, he felt that he had a heightened sense of responsibility to convey what Allah had revealed to him to his people. Now it's such a small verse, but there are such deep meanings behind this particular verse. You know, when you refer to the Holy Quran, Allah describes the human being as being hasty. And this is a dispraised quality of a human being. We should never haste in making decisions, except when it comes to the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when seeking His pleasure, when turning to Him in worship. Number two, there has to be a level of enthusiasm which is a prerequisite of spirituality. If we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we are filled with apathy and indifference, we want to rid ourselves from our responsibilities so that we're not held accountable later on, then that salah or that sawm or whatever it is will have no effect on us whatsoever. Unless there is enthusiasm, which is the driving force behind me worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There has to be a level of excitement, which was demonstrated by Nabi Musa alayhi salam. And number three, finally, the motive behind every action, the niyyah, the driving force behind every action is to seek the pleasure of Allah. This is the supreme achievement that we can all attain within our life. And all of this was articulated by Nabi Allah Musa alayhi salam. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq to understand the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, to integrate the deep philosophies within our lives, inshaAllah. A'udhu billahi min ash-shaytan ar-rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا مضاد له في ملكه ولا منازع له في أمره. الحمد لله الذي لا شريك له في خلقه ولا شبيه له في عظمته. نشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. جاء من عنده مصدقا للمرسلين خلف فينا راية الحق عليا وأولاده المعصومين حجج الله إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, I remember speaking a few months ago with regards to the vast numbers of people who are now converting towards the religion of Islam. Today, I want to approach the discussion from a different perspective. We can see that in Europe, conversion to Islam is rising. In Germany, in France, in Sweden, even in certain areas of the world like India, and so on and so forth. Generally speaking, throughout the globe, the number of conversions towards the religion of Islam is rising at an exponential rate. What's interesting, and this is a side note, and given the opportunity and the tawfiq to discuss this more in the future, inshallah, you find that there are now certain governments who have realized or are starting to realize the superiority of Islamic values over secularist and liberalist values. And this is the case of Turkey and Morocco currently, and we're seeing it in certain African countries as well. When you research as to how people have converted to Islam, some of their stories are very, very touching. There's one particular that I came across this week of a former Pakistani Hindu by the name of Deen Muhammad Sheikh, who is now in his 80s, converted to the religion of Islam in 1989. And until today, he has converted at least 100,000 to 110,000 Hindus towards the religion of Islam. That is remarkable. A single individual has influenced that number of individuals towards the religion of Islam. When he was interviewed and they asked him for his background and his story, he said, when I was exposed to the Quran, when I first came across the Quran, I read it with such intricacy, I realized that the 360 gods were of no use to me. When former Hindus who have now embraced the religion of Islam are being asked why, what was the motive for coming towards the religion of Islam, the unanimous reply, based on the number of participants that were interviewed, they said it is because of the sublime character, moral character of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. You know, the religion of Islam is founded by having good akhlaq. This is something that we're taught from a very, very young age, and this is something that we're reminded of constantly. The secrets of success is there within our hands. We try and go, to the furthest of lands to find success and the secrets of happiness, but sometimes it's just there in your hands. To have the sublime of characteristics, to mimic and to imitate the morality of Rasulullah is something that can bring about peace and can strengthen the community from its roots. Within America, for example, CNN reports that by 2040, in less than 20 years, Islam will be the second largest religion in America. Slowly, Islam is now transforming America. What's very interesting is that if you compare what's happened in the past 20 years, this mainstream narrative against the religion of Islam, people are still being attracted towards the religion. Recently, the Muslim News issued a report saying that 98% of names, equivalent to 1.5 million names on the FBI's watch list, are Muslims. So although the situation tells us that it's harder for Muslims to live, people are still attracted towards the religion of Islam. So this is a very interesting trend. Although there is a rise of Islamophobia within America, there is also a rise of Islam. So despite the negative propaganda against Muslims, people are still finding the religion of Islam very, very attractive. Now, of course, we don't know the different motives as to why people prefer to identify as Muslims. We don't know the intention as to why they convert. This is not something that we have access to. But you realize that certain individuals understand, they acknowledge that there are other benefits of converting towards Islam. But then someone could argue and say, but yes, they may have entered the religion of Islam with the wrong intentions, but later on in their lives, they may understand and acknowledge the profundity of Islam. So let me give you an example. Within prisons, former prisoners have been admitted saying that within the culture of prisons, you have the culture of gangs. And one has to be a part of a gang for them to survive. In order to survive within that environment, you have to be associated with a particular gang. So these gangs are based on ethnicity, culture, and so on and so forth. The biggest of these gangs are the Muslims. And that transcends the barriers of culture and language and tradition. So if you associate yourself with a Muslim gang, you are protected by the Muslims. So this is a clear advantage. It may not be it may not be a legitimate or authentic reason as to why a person may embrace the religion of Islam, but there are clear advantages of being identified as a Muslim. On the other hand, there are concerning trends as well that have been observed by certain researchers. Becoming Muslim doesn't necessarily mean that the individual will adhere to Islamic values. In fact, they may not even represent Islam in the best of ways. You see, as Muslims, we all have the responsibility, the individual responsibility to preserve Islamic values, especially akhlaq. But we are living in a time of moral decay. So just as how on a superficial, apparent level, there is a rise of women observing hijab, at the same time you will find women or even men posting inappropriate content on social media, or Muslims behaving in very, very questionable ways. From a different perspective, citizens in Europe, for example, feel very threatened when they are surrounded by Muslims, especially with the rise of gang culture, the rise in crime and drug abuse and so on and so forth. The behavior of the Muslims can be very, very provoking. But all in all, with the rise of Islam, it is treated as a threat on a political level. In certain European countries, the reactionary backlash against the rise of Islam has exacerbated over the past few years. I remember in the last previous session when we spoke about this, we spoke about the example of Sweden and how children are forcefully removed from their Muslim households and are placed under foster care. A report was released. Now, of course, there is a debate whether this particular report is true or not. The authenticity of this report is still being debated, where a Muslim girl was adopted by a gay couple. Now, of course, as I said, the authenticity is being debated, but the way society is now moving forward, even if we are questioning the authenticity today, within a few years, there is a very high probability that such cases will rise in numbers. When we speak about hijab, in Germany, for example, it's very hard for a woman to find a job in certain areas, in certain fields, whilst observing the hijab. So there is a trade-off. Remove the hijab and be able to work, or not work at all. Sweden and France, we're seeing certain policies being enforced which restricts the integration of women in society simply because they are fighting to preserve the hijab. Whereas the secularist and liberalist thought is promoting this very, very heavily, that the observance of hijab is a form of suppression and oppression. The removal of clothes and adopting very shameful behavior is a manifestation of independence. It's a manifestation of strength and autonomy. Within sports and broader entertainment, likewise, we see a very clear trend. Muslim athletes and celebrities are being penalized for not supporting the LGBT campaign. The pressure of this campaign is rising for such individuals. Last year, for example, Idris Gay, last year came under fire for refusing to bend the knee to the LGBT campaign. In the past month or so, 5 French Muslim footballers refused to play in a match in protest over wearing the LGBTQ colors. Muslims are now being forced to promote the ideologies which are in direct violation of their Islamic teachings. One of these footballers was Mustafa Muhammad. Many of you may have seen his tweet that he posted online. It's a very interesting tweet that he posted online. Very, very interesting. It summarizes the approach to such discussions. And I'll read this for you. He says, "I don't want to argue at all, but I have to state my opinion, or I have to state my position. I respect all differences. I respect all beliefs and convictions. The respect extends to others, but also includes for my personal beliefs as well. Given my roots, given my culture, the importance of my convictions and beliefs, it was not possible for me to participate in this campaign. I hope that my decision will be respected, as well as my wish not to argue about this, and that everyone is treated with respect." This doesn't have anything to do with Islam, homophobia. Let's be very, very clear here. It's to do with promoting an ideology which a person disagrees with. Isn't that what liberalism is all about? Giving autonomy to the person, promoting free speech and with it the freedom of thought, respecting differences of opinions, respecting religious differences. Well, there's no such thing as freedom of speech. If one wishes to slander religion and religious values, it's branded as freedom of speech. But if a person wishes to speak against certain ideologies which are very much prevalent within our society, it's branded as intolerance. In fact, if you look at the history of liberalism and how it came about, today it's a philosophy that strives within Western secular society. But you would be shocked as to how it established itself a couple of hundred years ago. The bloodshed and the violence that ensued, that took place to establish this philosophy. It's a very interesting point in history that we need to kind of look into as well, in understanding how liberalism came about and how it manifests today. In fact, when you look at, for example, France is now making it very, very difficult for Muslims to integrate within society, especially for athletes. In Ramadan, we witnessed that within the Premier League, during the time of iftar, there was a short pause in the game, wasn't there? To allow the Muslim footballers to take a break, to break their sawm, to break their fast. Well, France took a different position. They banned it. Another example is that French lawmakers have now proposed a hijab ban in competitive sports. As CNN puts it, the impact on women could be devastating. So although we are seeing a rise of Muslims within the world, we are seeing policies that are now being enforced to make lives harder for Muslims, which in turn makes it harder for them to integrate within society, to serve as role models for others as well. So there is a campaign to kind of shut this down, or to control the number of individuals converting towards the religion of Islam. An article that was published by the UN, it's titled, "Anti-Muslim Hatred Has Reached Epidemic Proportions." An independent rights expert, Ahmed Shahid, said that numerous states, regional and international bodies are to blame. When we turn towards Hajj, or when we turn our attention towards Hajj, what a beautiful manifestation of peace, of unity, of brotherhood. A moment where the peak of solidarity is known, and it's very much manifest. You know, we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us all the opportunity to visit His house one day, to partake in the wonderful actions, the manasik, following the footsteps of the greatest prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, many of us, unfortunately, we are not able to go, but it doesn't mean that we are not able to benefit from Hajj and the season of Hajj. Rather, these are considered as holy days. The ayah of the Holy Quran says, وَاذْكُرُ اللَّهَ فِي أَيَّامٍ مَعْدُودَاتٍ. Remember Allah through the appointed days. Sayyid ibn Tawus narrates from the 6th Holy Imam, he says that the appointed days are the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. What should one do during the days of Dhul Hijjah? Refer back to the verse. So, وَاذْكُرُ اللَّهَ. Remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a time where we should actively train ourselves in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and with it the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. The peak of these 10 days is the day of Arafah, and to engage in the beautiful dua of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam. We pray for the hastening reappearance of the Imam of our time, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. Allahumma salli ala abdik wa rasulik sayyid al-mursalin wa rasul rabbil alameen Muhammadin al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alih. وعلى أمير المؤمنين ووسيء رسول رب العالمين علي المرتضى عليه السلام. وعلى سيدة النساء العالمين وبدءة الخاتم النبيين فاطمة الزهراء عليه السلام. وعلى سيد شباب أهل الجنة الحسن المجتبى والحسين سيد الشهداء عليهم السلام. وعلى علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن قائم المنتظر المهدي. أرواحنا وأرواح العالمين له الفداء. اللهم افتح له فتحا يسيرا وانصره نصرا عزيزا. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات. وآخر دعوانا عن الحمد لله رب العالمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح، حي على خير العمل، حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض، الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم. هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين. وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم. ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم. مثل الذين حملوا التوراة ثم لم يحملوها كمثل الحمار يحمل أسفارا، بئس مثل القوم الذين كذبوا بآيات الله والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. قل يا أيها الذين هادوا إن زعمتم أنكم أولياء لله من دون الناس فتمنوا الموت إن كنتم صادقين ولا يتمنونه أبدا بما قدمت أيديهم والله عليم بالظالمين. قل إن الموت الذي تفرون منه فإنه ملاقيكم ثم تردون إلى عالم الغيب والشهادة فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون. فإذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا في الأرض وابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون. وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائمة. قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة والله خير الرازقين. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. لا إله إلا الله الحليم الكريم، لا إله إلا الله العلي العظيم. سبحان الله رب السماوات السبع ورب الأرضين السبع وما فيهن وما بينهن ورب العرش العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، الصراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربي. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر.
الله أكبر.
الله أكبر.
لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا إله إلا الله إلها واحدا ونحن له مسلمون. لا إله إلا الله ولا نعبد إلا إياه مخلصين له الدين ولو كره المشركون. لا إله إلا الله ربنا ورب آبائنا الأولين. لا إله إلا الله وحده وحده أنجز وحده ونصر عبدا وعز جندا وهزم الأحزاب وحده. فله الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت ويميت ويحيي وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة. قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر.
الله أكبر.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم يا لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر.
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. محمد وآل محمد صلوات اللهم صل على بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم بحق અબા અબ્દુલ્લાહ હુસૈન આપણામાં જે ભાઈઓ બહેનો બચ્ચાઓ બીમાર હોય આપણે દુઆ કરે કે અલ્લાહ લોકો બધાને શફા દે, બધાની તકલીફો દૂર થાય. આપણા આલિમો મરજા મોમિની ને મોમિનાત દુનિયામાં જ્યાં બી હોય યા અલ્લાહ તો લોકોને હિફ્ઝો અમાનમાં રાખ, અમારી બધી હાજતો પૂરી કર, અમારા ઇલ્મમાં વધારો કર. એવી દુઆ સાથે આપણે બધા સાથે 5 ફેરે અમ્મા યુજીબુ પડીએ. औज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम अम्मा युजीबुल मुस्तर्रा इज़ा दा व यक्शिफुस सू 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 अम्मा युजीबुल मुस्तर्रा इज़ा दा व यक्शिफुस सू. सूरह फातिहा शिफाउल मर्ज़ व दफ़्निल बला.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الأول قبل الإنشاء والإحياء والآخر بعد فناء الأشياء، العليم الذي لا ينسى من ذكره ولا ينكس من شكره ولا يخيب من دعاه ولا يقطع رجاء من رجاه. اللهم إني أشهدك وكفى بك شهيدا وأشهد جميع ملائكتك وسكان سماواتك وحملة أرشك ومن بعثت من أنبيائك ورسلك وأنشأت من أصناف خلقك أني أشهد أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك ولا عديل ولا خلف لقولك ولا تبديل، وأن محمدا صلى الله عليه وآله عبدك ورسولك أدى ما حملته إلى العباد وجاهد في الله عز وجل حق الجهاد، وأنه بشر بما هو حق من الثواب وأنذر بما هو صدق من العقاب. اللهم ثبتني على دينك ما أحييتني ولا تزغ قلبي بعد إذ هديتني وهب لي من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. صل على محمد وآل محمد واجعلني من أتباعه وشيته واحشرني في زمرته ووفقني لأداء فرض الجمعات وما أوجبت علي فيها من الطاعات وقسمت لأهلها من العطاء في يوم الجزاء إنك أنت العزيز الحكيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين، وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذريته علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي. السلام عليك يا حجة الله في أرضه، السلام عليك يا عين الله في خلقه، السلام عليك يا نور الله الذي يهتدي به المهتدون ويفرج به عن المؤمنين. السلام عليك أيها المهذب الخائف، السلام عليك أيها الولي الناصح، السلام عليك يا سفينة النجاة، السلام عليك يا عين الحياة، السلام عليك صلى الله عليك وعلى آل بيتك الطيبين الطاهرين. السلام عليك عجل الله لك ما وعدك من النصر وظهور الأمر. السلام عليك يا مولاي، أنا مولاك عارف بأولاك وأخراك، أتقرب إلى الله تعالى بك وبآل بيتك، وأنتظر ظهورك وظهور الحق على يديك، وأسأل الله أن يصلي على محمد وآل محمد، وأن يجعلني من المنتظرين لك والتابعين والناصرين لك على أعدائك والمستشهدين بين يديك في جملة أوليائك. يا مولاي يا صاحب الزمان، صلوات الله عليك وعلى آل بيتك. هذا يوم الجمعة وهو يومك المتوقع فيه ظهورك والفرج فيه للمؤمنين على يديك وقتل الكافرين بسيفك، وأنا يا مولاي فيه ضيفك وجارك، وأنت يا مولاي كريم من أولاد الكرام ومأمور بالضيافة والإجارة، فاضفني وأجرني صلوات الله عليك وعلى أهل بيتك الطاهرين.
الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا.